I was a joke in my own family. They never truly saw me as part of the lavish world they had built. I was invisible among those who considered themselves the center of the universe. But tonight, they pushed me to my breaking point. The cheap coupon lay in my hand, its faded print a blatant mockery. $25 off your next purchase at Bargain Mart. That was my 32nd birthday gift. Amidst the glittering chandeliers and overpriced champagne, my family burst into laughter and applause as if they had done something kind. "Oh, Isabella, don't make that face." Andrew, my brother, chuckled, swirling his whiskey glass, his eyes gleaming with smug amusement. "We just thought you could use a little help. After all, you do need that coupon, don't you?" "Need?" I scoffed. They knew nothing about me. They thought I was struggling, scraping by at some mediocre job, living in some cheap apartment. They had no clue about my real life. My mother, Evelyn Carter, nodded with her usual tight-lipped smile, the kind she used to dismiss anything unworthy of her attention. "Be practical, Isabella. You're always pinching pennies, so I figured you'd appreciate the gift. It's actually useful." Beside her, my father, Richard Carter, remained glued to his phone. One hand ran the largest real estate empire in the state. The other decided who in the family was worthy of his recognition. I, of course, had never made that list. "Be grateful," he muttered without looking up. "Andrew went through the trouble of arranging this dinner for you." "Went through the trouble?" I almost laughed out loud. All he had to do was pick up the phone and book a table at the most exclusive restaurant in the city, a place where a single bottle of wine on this table was worth more than the pathetic coupon they had just tossed at me. I clenched the crumpled paper in my hand, my chest cold with realization. I was used to their disdain, but never had it been this blatant. I wasn't a person to them anymore. I was a joke. "Actually," Olivia, my younger sister, spoke up, pulling me from my thoughts. She leaned forward, eyes twinkling with excitement. "Have you thought about Andrew's offer? If you want, he can pull some strings to get you a job as an assistant at Carter Enterprises. It's a great opportunity." A great opportunity? I nearly choked on my drink. They were offering me? Someone who had spent over a decade building my own financial empire, a job as an assistant at the family company? A company I knew better than the fools running it? A company that, in just a few hours, I would officially control? I glanced at my father, expecting him to shut Olivia down, to tell her not to say something so absurd, but no. He nodded, as if it were the most reasonable suggestion in the world. "You should consider it," he said in his authoritative tone. "It's time you learned what real work is." "Real work?" I gripped my wineglass, suppressing the bitter laughter threatening to escape. Who did they think I was, some failure desperate for their pity? I took a deep breath, swallowing down the storm brewing inside me. They would find out soon enough. I set my glass down, my gaze sweeping across each family member. They laughed, enjoying their extravagant dinner, unaware that by tomorrow, everything would change. I smoothed my dress and stood up, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Thanks, but I don't need Andrew's help." My mother frowned. "Sit down, Isabella, we're not done eating." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Some of us have more important matters to attend to in the morning." Andrew smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Another part-time gig, or have you finally decided to get serious about your career?" I tilted my head, my eyes locking onto his. "You're right, Andrew, I am getting very serious." "Very serious." I pulled a $200 bill from my wallet, placed it on the table 6 times the value of that pathetic coupon. "Consider it a tip, because, as my dear brother always says, debts should be settled properly." Andrew laughed, clapping mockingly. He didn't get it. None of them did. But tomorrow morning, when they walked into that office, they would. They would finally understand who really controlled everything. I turned and walked away, leaving my family behind. Still laughing. Still oblivious to the fact that they were about to lose everything. I stepped out of the restaurant without looking back. The cold wind swept through my hair, but I didn't feel the chill. My fingers tightened around the phone in my coat pocket, my heart pounding. Not with anger, but with anticipation. Finally, after all these years, my plan was about to be complete. The black SUV pulled up right on time, the door swung open and Jacob sat inside, his gaze as sharp as ever. "Everything is ready," he said the moment I shut the door. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Have the shareholders been notified?" Jacob smirked slightly. "The announcement goes live at 6 a.m. By the time Andrew wakes up, he'll realize he's no longer vice president." I couldn't suppress my smile. Andrew Carter, the arrogant fool who always saw himself as a financial genius, but was nothing more than a leech, living off the Carter name. He had no idea that the empire he was so proud of had been in my hands for a long time. I walked away from the Carter family 10 years ago, after my father pushed me out of the company. Back then, I had nothing but determination. I worked tirelessly at a small, unknown investment firm. I saved every dollar, investing in projects my family wouldn't even glance at. They thought I was struggling, barely getting by. In reality, I was quietly building my own empire. 5 years ago, I started acquiring shares of Carter Enterprises, bit by bit, through a web of subsidiaries and anonymous investment funds. 3 months ago, I became the majority shareholder. And tomorrow morning, the world would know. The SUV glided through the bustling streets of New York. I leaned back against the seat, closing my eyes, but my mind refused to rest. Jacob glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "Are you sure you don't want to wait until the board meeting to announce it? That way you could control their reactions better." I opened my eyes, staring out the window. "No. I want them to wake up and be blindsided. I want Andrew to walk into that office, feeling as confident as ever, only to realize he's lost everything." Jacob let out a quiet chuckle. "Rodolph." I shrugged. "I'm just giving them back what they gave me." Jacob didn't say another word. When the car stopped in front of my penthouse, he handed me a folder. "These are the final terms appointing you as interim CEO. The moment you sign tomorrow morning, you'll have full control." I took the documents, flipping through the pages. One signature was all it would take to control the billion-dollar corporation my family had mocked me for thinking I'd never reach. I lifted my gaze, meeting Jacob's eyes. "Good work. Now go get some rest, tomorrow will be a long day." He nodded and left. I stood on my balcony, looking down at the city, glowing beneath me. Tomorrow morning, New York would wake up to a major shift. I took a sip of wine, smirking. "Let's see who the real failure is now, Andrew." I stepped into Carter Enterprises at exactly 8 a.m., my head held high. The entire office fell silent as I walked through. Employees who once knew me only as Andrew's poor little sister now stared at me in confusion. I walked straight to the main conference room where an emergency board meeting had just been called. As I stepped inside, Andrew was slamming his hand against the table. "What the hell is this? Who authorized the stock sale? Who did this stupid thing?" I pulled out a chair, sat down and smiled. "Good morning, Andrew." He whipped around to face me, his face flushed red. "What the hell are you doing here?" Leisurely I pulled a stack of documents from my handbag and placed them on the table. "Today is a shareholder meeting, isn't it? And since I'm the majority shareholder, I figured I should be here." Andrew's face went pale. What did you just say?" I slid the documents toward him. "I now officially own 52% of Carter Enterprises. And that means—" I leaned forward, my voice slow and deliberate. "You are no longer the vice president." Silence blanketed the room. A board member slowly flipped through the documents. When he finally looked up, his voice trembled. She's right." Andrew stared at me, sheer horror flooding his eyes. I leaned back in my chair, crossed my arms, and flashed him a razor-sharp smile. "What was it you said, Andrew? Oh, right. Some of us could use a little financial assistance." His eyes darkened. "Isabella, don't do this." I smirked. "I already did." Andrew gasped, his hands trembling as they gripped the edge of the table. "You'll regret this." I tilted my head, locking my gaze onto him. You think I spent a decade planning this without preparing for your retaliation? Andrew had nothing left to say. I turned to the board, my voice firm. Let's begin the meeting. And just like that, the reign of Andrew Carter came to an end. I sat in the boardroom, watching as the color drained from Andrew's face, his mind slowly processing the fact that everything he once had was no longer his. Once, I had wished to stand here under different circumstances. I had hoped my father would see my potential, give me a chance, just one chance, to prove that I was not useless. But that moment had never come. I closed my eyes, memories of the past rushing back like a slow-motion reel. I stood in front of the gleaming glass doors of Carter Enterprises, my heart pounding in my chest. I had just graduated from the Wharton School with top honors in finance, one of the most prestigious programs in the country. My transcripts were flawless, my internship experience impressive, and my ambition undeniable. I stepped into my father's office, full of hope. "Dad, I want to work here," I said, my voice resolute. Richard Carter looked up from his desk, his cold gray eyes scanning me. "Here? Why?" I took a deep breath. "Because I have the skills. I'm not asking for a high position, I just want a chance to start. I'll take any job the company needs." My father let out a quiet chuckle, but there was no warmth in it. It was laced with disdain. "Isabella, you don't understand how the world works." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You don't belong in this company. Business isn't about grades or degrees. You wouldn't survive in this environment." I clenched my fists but kept my voice steady. "I can learn." "No." His voice was cold, unwavering. I bit my lip. "What about Andrew? He has no degree in finance, no experience, so why was he made vice president the moment he graduated?" My father looked at me as if I had just said something utterly foolish. "Because Andrew is the rightful heir to the company, he is a true Carter." I froze. Not?" He didn't answer. I glanced around the office. The place I had once dreamed of working. But at that moment, I realized the harsh truth. They had never intended to give me a chance. Clenching the strap of my handbag, I bit my lip to keep from crying. "Then I'll find my own path." I turned and walked away, not waiting for a farewell. And that was the last day I ever believed I had a place in this family. The struggle of the early days. I left Carter Enterprises with nothing but empty hands. No family backing, no golden path laid out for me. I applied to over 30 companies, but despite my stellar academic record, I had no connections. After dozens of rejections, I finally landed a minor position at a small investment firm, Taylor & Finch. My first job? Making coffee. I wasn't allowed near financial reports. No one saw me as an employee with potential. I was invisible. Just as I had been to my family. But I didn't give up. Every night I stayed at the office later than everyone else. I quietly observed how the investment analysts studied the market, how they made decisions, how they deciphered numbers on financial reports. 3 months later, I convinced my manager to give me a shot at a small project. 6 months later, I was promoted to financial analyst. 3 years later, I became one of the firm's top investment specialists. And all that time, I had been doing something no one knew about. I was investing? The silent moves. While Andrew and Olivia burned through money on luxury vacations, sports cars and mansions, I poured every cent into stocks. I didn't invest in big-name companies like everyone else. I hunted for potential small businesses poised for exponential growth. I built a secret portfolio, brick by brick, stock by stock. Every dollar I earned was reinvested. Not in designer handbags or extravagant dinners, but in power. It took 8 years, but I amassed a fortune beyond anything my family could imagine. And then, I made my move. The day I started buying out Carter Enterprises. I didn't buy shares directly. I used a web of small investment funds, shell companies, and transactions handled by people with no visible ties to me. I bought tiny portions of Carter Enterprises, slowly, discreetly. Everyone believed the Carter family still controlled the company. But the truth? I was the one holding the reins. I watched as Andrew sat frozen, unable to process the news of my takeover. He had no idea what had happened. But I did. Because I had spent an entire decade planning for this moment. The morning I took over. As I stepped into Carter Enterprises the next morning, I felt something unfamiliar. Not because the place was foreign, but because today, I was no longer an outsider. My footsteps echoed against the marble floors, and employees turned to watch me, their gazes filled with confusion and uncertainty. The large glass doors of the boardroom swung open forcefully, dragging a dead silence over the room. At the head of the conference table, Andrew Carter, the man who once sat in power, was hunched over his laptop screen, staring at it intently. He had undoubtedly read the announcement, he knew. But he still hadn't accepted the truth. I pulled out a chair, sat down slowly, exuding confidence. "Good morning, Andrew." His head snapped up, eyes blazing with fury, though he struggled to maintain his composure. You think you can do this?" I gave him a cold smile. "I don't think, Andrew." I did. The board members sat in silence, not daring to breathe too loudly. I placed a stack of documents on the table, my voice calm yet carrying an undeniable weight. According to the latest financial reports, Carter Enterprises has suffered losses for 3 consecutive quarters, especially in the Eastern Division. Coincidentally, the very division under your management. Andrew's hands clenched tightly on the table. "You're trying to pin this on me?" I tilted my head slightly, my gaze razor-sharp. "I don't have to try, Andrew, the numbers speak for themselves." A board member cleared his throat, eyes darting away. We need to discuss the company's financial situation." I nodded, not giving Andrew a chance to interrupt. "Discussion is a great idea. Let's talk about how Andrew managed to lose over $200 million in less than a year." The board murmured. Calmly, I pulled out a second set of documents and flipped to the key page. And not just that, according to the internal audit, Andrew has funneled more than $5 million from company funds into personal expenses. A mansion in Miami, a yacht, first-class flights to Europe, and let's not forget the rather interesting expenditure for a nightclub in Vegas. The CFO slammed a hand on the table. "Is this true?" Andrew tried to keep his face neutral, but I could see him unraveling. "I'm the vice president. I have the right to use company funds for client entertainment." I held his gaze. Entertaining clients with VIP passes to a nightclub? Very creative. A soft chuckle came from the board. I saw the veins in Andrew's neck tightening. He was about to snap. He slammed his hands on the table and shot to his feet. "You think you can kick me out of this company? This is my family's business." Slowly I stood as well, my eyes unwavering. "You're mistaken, Andrew. This is my company now." I slid another stack of documents toward the board. "I am now the majority shareholder, holding 52% of Carter Enterprises. That gives me full authority over executive decisions." The room fell into stunned silence. A few board members exchanged glances, then, nods of quiet agreement. Andrew shook his head, grasping at his last thread of hope. "Dad won't let this happen." I shrugged, my voice calm but ice-cold. "Only Longer has a say, and even if he did, I'm far beyond his reach now." His face drained of color, his breathing quick and uneven. I met his gaze, my words sharp as steel. "Andrew Carter, you are officially terminated from your position as Vice President of Carter Enterprises, effective immediately." The room plunged into absolute silence. Andrew opened his mouth to protest, but not a single board member spoke up in his defense. His eyes darted around, panic setting in as he realized there was no one left to save him. I turned toward the security team waiting by the door. "Please, escort him out." 2 security guards stepped forward. Andrew yanked his hands away from the table, but he knew he was powerless. He turned to me, his voice strangled with rage and desperation. "You're going to regret this, Isabella." I crossed my arms, offering him nothing but a cold, knowing smile. "Maybe, but before I regret it, make sure you've packed your things." He glared at me with pure hatred, then turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy as if dragging the weight of a crumbling empire. The door closed behind him. I exhaled slowly, the taste of victory spreading through me. The board remained motionless, as if they had just witnessed a hurricane tear through the room. I sat down, placing my hands on the table deliberately. "Now then," I said, my voice firm, razor-sharp. "Let's talk about the future of Carter Enterprises." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then, one by one, heads began to nod. I knew, from this moment on, I had won everything. I stood in the boardroom, staring at the door where Andrew had just been dragged out of Carter Enterprises. Out of my company. The thrill of victory still simmered in my chest, but I knew this battle wasn't over. My father wouldn't sit quietly. Richard Carter was not a man easily taken down. I had seen him destroy those who dared to stand against him. And now, I was the one who had just taken down his golden son. I turned to Jacob, who had been silently observing the meeting from start to finish. "How much time do we have?" Jacob smirked, his eyes sharp. "Not long, I just got word from the lawyers. Richard has officially filed a lawsuit." I let out a dry chuckle. I had been expecting this. "What are the charges?" Jacob pulled out a stack of documents and set them in front of me. "He's accusing you of insider trading, claiming you used privileged information to illegally acquire shares." I flipped through the pages, scanning the bold printed allegations that read like a declaration of war. I smirked. "He really thinks this will stop me?" Jacob crossed his arms, nodding slowly. "No, he doesn't think he can win. But winning isn't the point." I knew that. Richard's goal was to drag the case out, entangle me in years of legal battles, tarnish my reputation with the board, and create enough instability to turn shareholders against me. An old trick. The problem was, I had prepared for this. I closed the file and leaned back in my chair. "Amy doesn't know I'm already a step ahead." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "You mean dissolving Carter Holdings?" I nodded. "Exactly. He thinks I'm still operating my assets through Carter Holdings, the old investment firm I built. But 3 days ago..." I slid another folder across the table toward Jacob. "I officially dissolved Carter Holdings. Every asset, every share I own, has already been transferred to a new entity, Imperium Capital." Jacob flipped through the pages quickly, then let out a low chuckle. "Smart. That means any documents Richard has on Carter Holdings are useless." Precisely. Richard had built his lawsuit around my old financial structure. But the problem was, that structure no longer existed. He could sue Carter Holdings all he wanted, except Carter Holdings no longer controlled anything. I had moved everything beyond his reach. Jacob scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "I bet Richard is losing his mind right now." I smirked. "We'll see soon enough." That night, as I stood on my apartment balcony, sipping a glass of red wine, my phone rang. Richard's number. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Isabella." His voice was cold as steel, stripped of the arrogance he once carried. "Hello, father." I took another sip of wine, my voice calm. "You think you can take me down like this?" I let out a quiet chuckle. "I don't think, father, I did." A heavy silence. I could almost hear his sharp, uneven breathing on the other end. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since the day you refused to let me into the company." A scoff came from the other end, but this time, there was no confidence behind it. "You think you've won, daughter?" "No." I placed my glass down on the glass table, my gaze fixed on the glittering Manhattan skyline. "I haven't just won. I've taken back what was mine." "I won't stop." Richard's voice hardened. "I'll fight this lawsuit. I'll find a way to regain control." I didn't waver. "You can try. But no one knows better than you that you lost your power a long time ago." He didn't respond immediately, but I knew I was right. "If you were still in control, you wouldn't be calling me tonight." Silence. Long. Heavy. I could almost picture his face, his eyes burning with fury, bitterness, and helplessness. Finally he spoke, his voice low and sharp as a blade. You really are my daughter. I smirked. That's the only thing you can take pride in about me. I ended the call. Below, the city lights glittered, as if nothing had changed. But I knew. Richard Carter's entire world had collapsed in a single night. I knew Andrew wouldn't go down without a fight. He had never faced failure before. He had lived his entire life under our father's protection, spending money recklessly without a care in the world. But today, he had nothing left to cling to. I left the office after my meeting with the board, but I kept a close watch on his every move. I knew he would try to turn the tables. Of course. I had already anticipated it. 2 days after his termination, Andrew suddenly stormed back into Carter Enterprises. He no longer looked like a powerful vice president. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He barged straight into my office, no knock, no hesitation. You think this is over, Isabella? I lifted my gaze, unfazed. You still haven't learned your lesson, Andrew. He slammed a stack of documents onto my desk, his face twisted with rage. I contacted some loyal shareholders. I can apply pressure to get my position back. I scoffed, pushing the stack of documents aside as if they were worthless. Which shareholders? The ones who benefited from your shady business deals? Leaning back, I locked my cold gaze onto him. Do you really think I just sat here, waiting for you to strike back without preparing? Andrew hesitated slightly. I pulled another file from my drawer and tossed it onto the table in front of him. I ordered a full financial audit the moment I took over the company. His body stiffened, his eyes flickering with unease. And guess what? I continued, my voice razor sharp. You left a trail, everywhere. Andrew flipped open the file, his face turning pale as he scanned the contents. $5 million for a beachfront mansion? $2 million for a yacht? $500,000 poured into high-end nightclubs? And this? This is just the tip of the iceberg. He swallowed hard, his hands trembling. This can't be official evidence. I met his eyes, unwavering. I've already sent the full report to the SEC. Andrew inhaled sharply, his entire body tensing. You're joking. No. And under federal law, embezzlement of funds from a publicly traded company is a serious crime. The penalty? Anywhere from 5 to 20 years in prison. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. I smiled. Calm, yet deadly. You've lost everything, Andrew. He shot up from his chair, panic flooding his face. I can negotiate. We can find a way to fix this. I crossed my arms, shaking my head slowly. No, Andrew. I don't negotiate with someone who drained company funds to fuel his extravagant lifestyle. The boardroom door swung open forcefully. 2 SEC agents stepped inside, their expressions cold and unreadable. Mr. Andrew Carter? Andrew spun around, his face drained of color. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of embezzlement and securities fraud. No, I can explain. The agents didn't listen. They cuffed him in front of the entire office staff. Andrew thrashed. Dad won't let this happen, he'll save me. I stared at him, my gaze sharp as a blade. You think Dad will save you? Andrew froze, eyes widening. Right at that moment, my phone rang. The name on the screen. Richard Carter. I put it on speaker for everyone to hear. Richard's voice was calm, devoid of emotion. I'm not going to do anything, Andrew. Andrew stood in stunned silence. Dad, you can. Richard sighed. You've caused too much trouble. Now you have to deal with the consequences. Andrew let out a choked, desperate sound. Dad. I'm your son. I'm the heir to this family. Richard let out a cold, bitter laugh. No, Andrew, you were just a mistake. The call ended abruptly. Andrew stopped struggling. He stood there, handcuffed, betrayed by the very man he had worshipped his entire life. I stepped closer, leaning in to whisper in his ear. You've lost, and this time, no one can save you. He turned to me, his eyes burning with hatred. You'll pay for this, Isabella. I simply shrugged. Good luck in prison, Andrew. He was escorted out of the office, Every employee's eyes locked onto the scene. I stood still, head held high. Andrew had built his entire life on wealth, power, and our father's protection. But today, he lost everything. And me? I was still standing, untouchable. The boardroom remained frozen in shock. Andrew Carter, the so-called rightful heir of this company, had just been let out in handcuffs, with no one left to save him. I stood in the center of the room, absorbing the tense atmosphere. Some board members darted nervous glances at me, while others hastily flipped through the documents on the table, searching for an escape route. But there was none. I slowly swept my gaze over them, my voice sharp, yet unhurried. I believe it's time we make some official changes. No one objected. One of the CFOs cleared his throat, struggling to compose himself. Miss Isabella, as the majority shareholder, do you have a nomination for the position of chairman of the board? I placed both hands on the table, steady and commanding. There's no need for discussion. I will take that position. A few exchanged glances, but not a single person opposed me. They had seen what happened to those who stood on the wrong side. In just 10 minutes, the votes were cast and signed. I was officially named chairwoman of Carter Enterprises. At last, this company was entirely mine. As I left the boardroom, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. Richard Carter. I didn't rush to answer. I let it ring 3 times, savoring every second he was forced to wait. Then, I picked up. What is it, Father? Richard's voice was low, stripped of its usual arrogance. You think you've won, Isabella? I smirked, my eyes tracing the glowing streets of New York below. No. I haven't just won, I've taken back everything. Silence? I could picture his face. A man who once held absolute power, now watching everything crumble before him. Andrew destroyed this family, Richard muttered, his voice cold. I let out a quiet laugh. No, you destroyed it a long time ago. A sharp breath on the other end. But no denial. I pulled the phone away from my ear, ready to hang up. This time, Father, you have no more moves left to play. And with that, I ended the call. Richard Carter was powerless. And I had just risen to the top. That night I returned to my penthouse, a place no one in my family had ever set foot in. It sat on the 70th floor of a towering skyscraper, overlooking the entire city. Every piece of furniture was flawless. Just like every detail of my decade-long plan. Jacob was already there, 2 glasses of champagne waiting on the table. He watched me, his eyes filled with something I rarely saw in others. Respect. So, you finally did it, he said. I picked up my glass, swirling the golden liquid inside the crystal. Not just did it, I clinked my glass against his, my voice a quiet but unwavering declaration. I took back everything. Jacob chuckled, shaking his head. I have to admit, this was one of the most brilliant takeovers I've ever witnessed. I took a slow sip, my eyes locked onto the city lights flickering below. Everything the Carter family once owned now belonged to me. I was no longer the girl I once was, the one who stood outside my father's office, begging for a chance. Now I was the one in power. Jacob set his glass down, crossing his arms. So what now? You've taken the company, you've taken down your father, and Andrew. Do you really think this is the end? I looked at him, a sharp glint flashing in my eyes. There's still one more thing I need to finish. Jacob blinked, then let out a quiet chuckle. Richard Carter? I nodded slowly. He's lost everything, but I want to make sure he never rises again. Pulling out my phone, I scrolled through my contacts. A name appeared on the screen. Someone who could help me end Richard Carter's career for good. I pressed call. We have work to do. Jacob sat back, watching me with a knowing smile. I set my champagne glass down, my eyes gleaming like a wolf ready to hunt. This game wasn't over yet. I hadn't erased Richard Carter from this world completely. But trust me, that day was coming very soon. Isabella Carter's story is more than just a tale of revenge, It's proof of the power of perseverance, strategy, and determination. In a world where power is often handed down through connections, rather than earned through merit, Isabella proved that true success isn't about privilege. It's about intelligence and resilience. Life works the same way. You may be underestimated, cast aside, or even betrayed. But if you learn to seize opportunities, calculate every move, and refuse to give up, the day you win will come. And when it does, no one will be able to stop you. What do you think about Isabella Carter's story? Has she truly won, or are there still challenges ahead? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to follow the channel for more stories on life, family, and the hard-earned lessons that come from the most complicated relationships.